The first time I noticed something strange was when my tent zipper jammed for the third time that morning. I remember standing there in the sharp early sunlight, coffee steaming in my tin mug, wondering how a zipper could get packed full of grit when I'd brushed off every speck before setting up. The camp was alive with chatter, half our group fussing over breakfast, the others plotting out which trail to tackle that day. We'd come to what the ranger called a classic spot, a broad clearing near a lake rimmed by pines, close enough to a parking lot for convenience, but just far enough to feel wild. It was beautiful, sure, but the earth under our boots felt tired. The fire ring was rimmed with blackened stones, and the soil was pocked with old stake holes. Even the trees looked weary, their bark carved with initials and hearts that had long since flaked away. I brushed it off at first. Camp quirks. It wasn't until my camp stove sputtered out mid-boil, brand new fuel canister, no wind, that I started to feel a little uneasy. Then someone's spoon disappeared. Then a gust came through, sharp and sudden, sending paper plates swirling into the trees. We laughed, muttering about mischievous forest spirits, but the laughter didn't quite settle right. The air felt off, too still between the gusts, too heavy when the wind died. That afternoon, we hiked out toward the ridge trail, crossing patches of trampled ground where countless boots had already worn the moss to dust. Even the stream we stopped at looked strained, running low and clouded. I filled my bottle anyway, filtering the water twice. As we sat eating jerky and trail mix, one of the guys, Eli, pointed out that even the birds seemed quiet. I hadn't noticed until then, but he was right. Not a single song carried through the pines. When we got back to camp near dusk, things had gone further sideways. Someone's tent poles had bent. My lighter was gone from the picnic table, and the small pile of gathered firewood had somehow rolled halfway down the hill, scattered like a kicked-over offering. We tried to make a joke of it, called it the ghost of campsite 26. But when the night settled in, and the trees began to creak under a wind that came from nowhere, nobody was really laughing anymore. That was the first night we heard the whispers, or what sounded like whispers. Just faint rustling, like dry leaves being dragged across the dirt, though nothing was moving. I remember sitting by the dying fire, watching the smoke twist toward the stars, and feeling that we didn't belong there. Not because it was haunted, because it was tired of us. The next morning broke grey and uneasy. The lake lay still as glass, but the air felt thick, heavy with the kind of quiet that makes you whisper without knowing why. The first thing we noticed was the smell. Something earthy and sour, like overturned soil after rain. Except there hadn't been any. Then came the realization that the food bag we'd hoisted into the tree was on the ground, rope frayed clean through. Every crumb of trail mix and loaf of bread was gone, and not even a single paw print marked the damp earth around it. Eli crouched to inspect the rope, muttering that it looked cut, not chewed. The rest of us traded uneasy glances. No one had a knife sharp enough to do that so cleanly. We tried to shake it off and focus on the day ahead. I went to wash up in the lake, but even the water seemed different, murky, darker, as if the bottom had stirred itself in the night. The reflection staring back at me was warped by tiny ripples that appeared and vanished without wind. When I cupped my hands to drink, it tasted faintly metallic. Maybe the algae's blooming, I said aloud, though it sounded like an excuse. By noon, the inconveniences multiplied. A boot sole separated cleanly from its stitching. The camp chairs refused to stay unfolded, as though the joints had warped overnight. One of the girls swore she'd left her map on the table and found it instead wedged in the crook of a pine 20 yards away. The strangest part was how the forest itself seemed to be closing in. The trail to the ridge, clear yesterday, now looked narrower, overgrown with vines that hadn't been there before. We pushed through anyway, though each footstep sank a little deeper into the spongy soil. It smelled of rot and pine sap. "Feels like the woods are swallowing the place," Eli said. He tried to sound amused, but his voice cracked at the edges. We reached a viewpoint overlooking the valley, where the patchwork of campsites dotted the far shore. Blue tarps and tents peeked through the trees like invasive blooms. The sheer number of them was sobering, each one a mark of someone else who'd stood here, built a fire, left a trace. Looking down, I felt a strange guilt rise in my chest. The beauty was still there, but dulled, like a photograph handled too often. On the hike back, a wind kicked up from nowhere. It wasn't a steady breeze, but bursts, sharp, deliberate, as if something exhaled through the trees. Dust stung our eyes. Pine needles whipped against our jackets, and for a heartbeat I thought I heard a groan beneath it all, deep and low, like the earth shifting its weight. When we stumbled into camp, exhausted and uneasy, someone whispered, "Maybe we should pack up tonight." I didn't argue. The forest didn't feel like ours anymore. It felt like it was warning us. We tried to keep busy that evening, telling ourselves that routine would make everything feel normal again. I busied myself with kindling, though the branches I gathered seemed damp no matter how dry they looked. The fire sputtered and hissed, coughing smoke into my eyes. Eli was checking the tents, tightening guy lines that had somehow worked themselves loose, while Marcy and Ben sorted through what was left of our food. Every few minutes, someone muttered about heading out early in the morning. No one disagreed, but nobody said it outright either. It felt as if the woods were listening. As twilight slipped in, a light mist crept off the lake, curling around our ankles and into the hollow spaces between the trees. The air smelled faintly of sulphur and wet leaves. Somewhere, out beyond the tree line, a branch cracked, loud, sharp, deliberate. We froze, heads swiveling. Another crack followed, closer this time. Eli grabbed his headlamp and shined it into the woods, the beam slicing through the fog. Nothing. No eyes, no movement. Just that heavy, waiting silence again. Then Marcy's voice cut through it all. "My phone's gone." She wasn't supposed to have it out. Reception didn't reach here anyway, but she'd been using it as a camera earlier. We tore through the picnic table, her pack, the nearby ground. Gone. Not stolen, not misplaced. It was just gone. And when she finally gave up, she found her sleeping bag soaked through, though her tent flap had been zipped tight. She held it up by the corner, and the water dripped from it like something freshly pulled from a riverbed. By then, everyone was spooked enough to abandon bravado. We decided to turn in early, though none of us expected to sleep much. The fire had gone out faster than it should have, leaving only a dull glow beneath the ashes. I lay there in my tent, listening to the wind pick up again, those same strange gusts, coming in bursts that rattled the fly and made the trees moan. Between the gusts, there were other sounds, faint pattering, like footsteps too light to be human, circling the camp. I held my breath and listened harder. The sound would fade, then return from another direction, as though the forest itself were pacing. When I finally drifted toward sleep, I dreamed of roots, great, tangled roots rising through the soil, curling around our tents, prying loose the stakes and lifting us like toys. I woke with a start to find the floor of my tent tilted slightly. One corner peg had come loose, the line pulled taut in the wrong direction. I looked out through the mesh. The mist was thicker now, clinging to every surface. It felt alive somehow, shifting with intent. That night, The forest didn't just surround us. It pressed in, silent and patient, as if deciding what to do with us next. By dawn, we were all awake, though no one admitted to sleeping. The mist hadn't burned off. It clung low over the lake and drifted through camp like smoke from a dying fire. My breath came out in pale clouds, and the air carried a strange, damp chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The ground was soft beneath my boots, too soft. When I stepped near the fire ring, my foot sank half an inch into what should have been solid earth. It felt spongy, swollen with last night's dew or something deeper. Ben crouched near the shore, staring down at the waterline. "Look at this," he said quietly. The sand around his boots was littered with tiny fragments, plastic, foil, even a twist tie, litter, half buried. We hadn't seen it before, but now it seemed everywhere. Bottle caps caught in the reeds, scorched tin from old fires half buried under pine needles. It was as if the forest had turned itself inside out overnight, showing us all the things people had left behind. We started breaking camp. The tent poles creaked as we folded them, bending with an odd resistance, like the metal itself didn't want to leave. Eli yanked at one, muttering under his breath, and the pole snapped clean in half. He just stared at it. "Brand new," he said. "Bought it last week." Nobody answered. As we worked, the wind picked up again, soft, erratic, but strong enough to scatter ash from the dead fire pit across our gear. The flakes settled on my skin, leaving faint grey streaks that refused to brush off. When I looked closer, I realised it wasn't ash at all. It was dust. Fine, gritty dust that smelled faintly of smoke and plastic. It coated everything, clinging to us as if marking us somehow. Marcy stopped packing and just stood there, staring into the trees. "Do you hear that?" she asked. At first I didn't. Then I caught it. A faint creaking, like trees swaying in a wind that wasn't there. Beneath it, something softer, almost a hum, a vibration running through the ground, through the soles of my boots. The sound wasn't menacing exactly. It was sad, like the forest was breathing, whispering under its breath. That's when Eli said it, low and steady, as if realizing it aloud. "It's not ghosts. It's this place. It's tired of us." No one laughed. The words settled in heavy, more certain than superstition. We looked around at the torn-up ground, the litter surfacing, the trees scarred by years of careless carvings. The signs had been there all along. We'd just never bothered to see them. When we finally hoisted our packs, the air seemed to ease. The wind dropped, the hum faded, and for a brief moment the lake went perfectly still again, like the forest was watching to make sure we'd go. And though we didn't speak of it then, I think all of us understood. Whatever had been happening wasn't a haunting. It was a warning, gentle but firm. Nature's quiet way of telling us we'd overstayed our welcome. The trail out felt longer than it should have. The forest that had welcomed us days before now stood solemn and hushed, every step of our boots sinking into damp ground that seemed to breathe beneath us. No birdsong, no insects, just the faint crackle of branches falling somewhere deep within the trees. We kept close, no one straying more than a few paces from the group. It wasn't fear, not exactly, but a kind of reverence, as if we were walking through someone else's home after realizing we hadn't been invited. Halfway to the parking lot, we passed a meadow where the grass grew in uneven patches, scarred by old tire tracks and flattened from years of tents. Bits of forgotten gear poked up through the soil. A melted spoon, a corner of nylon, a rusted canteen. The sight of it made my stomach twist. Each item was small, meaningless on its own, but together they told the story of a place slowly worn thin by our presence. I thought of the restless wind, the frayed rope, the way the trees had seemed to groan around us. Maybe all those little oddities weren't coincidences. They were the land trying to reclaim itself, to shrug off what we'd left behind. When we finally saw the trailhead sign, relief washed over me. But it was heavy relief, the kind that comes with guilt. We stood for a moment, staring back down the path we'd come. The mist had lifted now, and sunlight filtered through the treetops, catching in the haze of dust still hanging low to the ground. It was beautiful again, heartbreakingly so. Yet beneath the beauty, I could sense the same weary pulse I'd felt that morning. The forest breathing slow and shallow, enduring us. Eli dropped his pack first, wiping sweat and grime from his face. "Next time," he said quietly, "let's find somewhere less loved." None of us argued. We all knew what he meant. There are wild places, and then there are places people have tried too hard to love. Loved them to the point of exhaustion. Before we loaded the car, I walked a few steps back down the trail and knelt by a cluster of young pines. The soil there was loose, and I brushed away a few stray wrappers that had blown against their roots. It wasn't much, but it felt like something. A small apology maybe, or a promise to do better. As we drove away, the trees thinned, giving way to highway and open sky. Yet even then, the feeling stayed with me. That nature isn't cruel or vengeful. It simply remembers. Every footprint, every campfire scar, every careless moment adds up until the land itself starts to whisper enough. And if you're quiet, if you really listen, you can hear it asking not for fear, but for respect. That night, long after we'd reached home, I dreamed of that lake again. But this time it was calm, untouched. Its surface smooth and clear. No tents, no voices. Just the forest, breathing easy, at peace, waiting for the world to forget it for a while.